Would you like to come?
Yeah.
Here to the front. I think that is a great pleasure to have today with us Ezio Manzini. And I have been wondering, what can I say about Ezio that you have not already read, or that you don't know already? So that was my challenge. And I realized by chance this week that there are different categories of humans. And one of them are the ones that create culture. And I see that Ezio Manzini belongs to the category of people that create culture. And that category, for me, relates to what Margaret Mead calls evolutionary clusters. So a group of people that, when coming together, shift the perception of reality. And I think that Ezio has helped us shift our understanding of design and the role of design. He fostered, to help us, to enlighten us, he fostered the development of DESIS, which is a network, but it's also a platform for people to engage, to reflect about practice, to talk about practice, and also to change the way we are practicing. He has also developed key concepts, like, for example, in the books, Design When Everyone Designs, and that's the way I interpret it, and he can correct me then after, is that once we design interventions in a community, they have to be small, open, distributed, and connected. And at least for me as a practitioner, those were key aspects that helped me change my practice. So it is a great honor for me to have today in this classroom a real leader in design, someone that is helping us to be better designers. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
The floor is all yours. You have the floor.
Okay. So, good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to be here, and thanks to the school for inviting me. Well, I want to share with you some ideas, but first of all, as probably you have already seen, so I commit myself in the last 47 days not to start any discussion without having some relationship to what is happening. So I don't know here, but in Italy we are already overwhelmed of images of this tragedy of war. So I don't want to insist with new images. But nevertheless, I think that it's very important in some way not to forget that whatever we can say and whatever are the specific discussion that we are going to do today, we are in a very dangerous moment in the history of human being. And I think that we have not only to be against war, but we have each one of us for what we can, and also for what we can as designer, try not to only to say I like peace, but try to understand what does it mean to be peacemaker in this moment. I will not now enter so much, this is not my topic today to talk about what does it mean to be peacemaker, but for sure it's not only to say I like peace, but unfortunately there is this situation, and so we have to assist to this kind of growing, talking and making terrible things. So we have to be capable to find in ourselves some energy to do something. For instance, in my original university, Politecnico, they started, I say they because I'm not so involved, at least I'm very involved emotionally, but I'm not one of those that really did it, but I find that it's been very important. So they started a kind of call, asking for whatever kind of ideas that moving from what we do as designer could be interpreted as peacemaking. And I'm sure that who started did not know what will happen, so which kind of project will arrive. But in any case, they tried to trigger students, and not only students, and this is open, so you can participate if you want. If you go, you can find Design Against War. In the internet, you find it. So I'm not saying that this is going to solve the problem, but whatever we can do, it's a way to participate and to try to avoid, to assist to what is happening, assuming a kind of passive attitude. This is not only an advertisement, this is also an advertisement, but it's not only an advertisement because when I've been asked to come here, I said, or maybe before, I said, I have a new book, maybe we can make a presentation. And so my lecture now is also related to this book that has been in the English version already since 1 month, more or less. And it has something to do with be a peacemaker, not directly, also because obviously I wrote the book before what is happening now, but in some way, yes, because if we had to discuss about what is war and what is peace, in my view, there is a link with what are the topic of my book and the topic of my conversation now with you, that is these two terms, distance and proximity. And in my view, if you make war with somebody, you take distance. So in some way to shut to somebody else, you have to consider the other as somebody that is distant. Maybe not physically, because the worst war are the civil war that maybe are people shooting each other in between people. There was neighborhoods until before. So it's not only an issue about physical distance, but to feel that the other is very diverse. And for instance, in Italy now, for me, it's a disaster because all the media are continuously pumping on the idea that someone are terrible. They are terrible. But if you build this kind of distance, it will be very difficult afterward to reestablish a conversation. So I think that in some way the notion of distance and proximity is in some way part of a culture of peace. So the culture of peace has to be based also on idea of proximity in the way that I will try to tell the story in a while. So this is what I'm going to do. Already said, I want to talk about proximity, and probably for many of you say, yes, but why you come from Italy now and tell us 2 hours, not 2 hours, 1 hour to speak about this term. And so I hope that during my presentation it will appear more in a clearer way. Let's say now, just to give you the taste, that for me at least it's a very powerful word, a very powerful concept. That for me, it's the result of a line of thinking that could have had design when everybody designed that has been until in some way introduced by what I mean before. And afterward, I wrote a book that is called The Policy, Everyday Politics. And or The Politics of Everyday, you know, I don't remember the name of my books, but it was The Politics of the Everyday. And afterward, thinking what in practical is the politics of the everyday, I arrived to focus on this notion of a proximity as something that could summarize a lot of what we were trying to do. And to talk about proximity, of course, we have to take a kind of perspective and to look to what could be the discussion of proximity today in relation to what was in the previous period. So if we move from the pre-modern, that now is not a philosophical issue. Let's imagine a moment in which you did not have cars, you do not have telephone, and of course you don't have internet. In that period, to live nearby was the only way to organize a society. There was no possibility to organize a society without being in touch, also physically. And the city and the villages were mixed. The different functions, the different activities were mixed together because this was the only way to organize. So you had to move physically to meet the other ones, and it had to be after a few minutes from where you was. Afterwards, with modernity, in this moment simply with mass transportation or individual private transportation, and after with the telephone, and afterward now with the digital media, we started to have the possibility to organize the life of people not being so near, but being distant. And therefore it was supposed, it is supposed still now, that given that we live a continuity of our functions and our following our desire, we could move from one monofunctional point to another one, recombining the continuity of our life through the fact that we can move from one place to the other that are distant one from the other ones, or now we can use the digital space to connect. And this appeared to be very reasonable, and in some way there was also a logic of functioning, because if you concentrate all the activities in places that are dedicated, so you have why you have to have shops distributed in the city when you can have a commercial center where everything could be done together in a more effective way. Why you should have offices spread in the city when if you create a center for business, it could be much more effective. Why you should have a bar or other entertainment places when you can have the place for the entertainment all together that are much more exciting. And therefore you had what the planners call the zoning, so the division of the space in specialized space. So the logic was the logic of functionality of each one of these different actions, and the scale. So the biggest is the more is the better. And therefore they started to be more and more distant, and people was more and more obliged to move from one place to the other. I had to make a little parenthesis. Talking here in an historical town, as in many other historical towns around in the world, not many, by the way, some historical towns, some towns that are historical, because there are not so many historical towns around in the world, they have still a structure that comes from the pre-modern society. So they maintain this mixité, this mixing of different functions. And therefore somebody could say, yes, but what you are saying, if we are in Lucerne, we are already in this condition, yes or not. So if I take, I don't know here, but if I take many places in Italy, historical city, they still maintain this proximity with the density of interaction and diversity of interaction because they come from the past. But at the same time, this quality is decreasing. If we don't do anything, it could also disappear. And in all of these towns, there is maybe a center, there is still some element of this traditional proximity, but all around there are a new part of the cities that do not have. And afterward, if we move from our historical cities to, I don't know, the 200 million people living in the city, in the new city in China that has been built in the last 20 or 30 years, they do not have anything about what we have in Lucerne or in many cities in Italy. So the issue has a value that is a most general one. So why is it important to see what it was and what has become and is becoming? Because we are discovering that this trend, that I can name it as a trend of distancing, has a tragic implication that are ecological, because there is a lot of people moving around, consuming a lot of oil and generating a lot of pollution. It's social, because if people move around, they do not have opportunity really to consolidate the possibility to interact with the other, and so to build communities on that. And cultural, because it developed the idea of individuality. And the political, because when people is alone and connected, the risk is all what we call the populism. So the individual people in their own home in relation to somebody that speak very loud in the media. So the most evident element when people talk about proximity, or in general or related to the city, is to reduce the pollution and the traffic. But it's not only the traffic, it's that that proximity that do not exist, that distance that have been created, generate this psychological distance in between the people. And so now we have this condition of loneliness that is becoming a real social disease. I don't know here, but in many places, all the places in the big metropolis, loneliness is one of the major problems. And with the change in demography, with more and more people that are becoming older and older, this is a dramatic issue that is very difficult to solve, because one thing is to have a society done by community groups, etc. Another thing is to have a society that is done by individual people, bringing problem, each one of them, individually. And therefore, in some way, we have to rethink what could be the idea of proximity today, and how we can change the trend, regenerating some condition of proximity that in any case will not be the same proximity of the past, because all the conditions around are different. So in some way we have to rediscover what could be to rebuild the condition of proximity in the world in which, in any case, we are living in a hybrid space. So we are living in the physical space, but also in the digital ones. But when I say about proximity, I am stressing that it's also a physical proximity important. So it's not only the so-called digital communities or people that are everywhere in the planet, but it should be community of people that could be also supported by some digital platforms, but the digital platform has to be used to help people to meet in the real world, in some way to recompose the possibility of people to generate some network in the real world. So, given that, somebody and me started to think that this notion of proximity was a very powerful one. And it is powerful because it connects two different ideas of proximity that you will see in a while, what I call the relational proximity and what I call the operational proximity. And anticipating what we will see is so powerful, and for me it's powerful for the designers, because given that you have these two facets of the same concept, you can play on one side to generate something on the other side. And if you want, the very final part of my story is that me and many people here are interested in the quality of the relationships in between people. That means what you can get through the relational proximity, but at the same time we know that relationship cannot be designed. And therefore, how you create conditions that promote the quality of relationships, moving on the other side of proximity, so changing the opportunity of working on the operational proximity to generate conditions that are more favorable to create also the relational ones. So the operational proximity already anticipated the condition in which, being near, we can do something together. So you can describe how, for instance, all the services are organized and see if they are spread and generate the proximity. So the more that you bring some services near to the citizens or the users, the more you can have this operational proximity. And what we are searching for are for system of proximity that should be sufficiently dense and sufficiently diversified, because with density and diversification you can offer to people what is the title of my book, a livable proximity. So you can live in your proximity because more or less you can find whatever you need nearby. And at the same time, given that my life and the life of my neighborhoods are traveling in the same local networks, we have much more opportunity to intersect and probably to start a conversation and probably to start what is the relational proximity. So,
Ezio, remember that we talked about the word actants that you were thinking about.
Yes, but this is only actant is a term that comes from Bruno Latour, for who know him, and says when we talk about how the system works, normally we consider the agent that are the human being. But in the reality, when things happen, the agents are not only human. There are also other kind of agents. They could be living but not human, or the object and the physical environment. So following the language from Bruno Latour, all those are called actants. That is a kind of agent, but considering that it's not human. And thank you. So the relational proximity is probably something that we like because it's a very human component. What does it mean to have relational proximity? To be open, to start to have an exchange in terms of empathy, maybe to start some conversation, maybe with this conversation to evolve toward generate some common projects. So the two elements of the functional, operational proximity, so what we physically can do together, and the fact that we can do it having a certain kind of interaction that is a relational interaction with this empathy and willing to collaborate are the two facets of the story. Then when we will go on, we will see that this some way the quality of some design intervention that we can have is considering both of them. And this idea of proximity can help us to generate a scenario that can be called the scenario of the livable proximity. So a scenario in which you can imagine that around people you can have what you need. And what you need is not only to solve some problems, but also to have some relational quality in your life. And so here there is a kind of definition. This is Barcelona, by the way. That is a very good example of what I'm talking about. So in general, it's a society where everything you need is in everyday life is just a few minutes walk from where you are. It's not mandatory that you have to use it, but you have to offer the possibility to find it. So in some way, this could be a kind of right of the city. I don't know if you know this terminology of the right of the city. That means what does it mean to be in a city and what we should have in the city. So these ideas say to be in the city means many other things, but means that you can find whatever you want, a few minutes walk from where you are. And this is the most obvious: less traffic, less CO2, less stress, but also to offer people more time, because if you can reduce the commuting, people have more time that should be used for doing something else. So it's not only the very practical issue related to the environment, but it's also in some way giving back, inverted comma, to people the possibility to have more 1 or 2 hours every day. That is not mandatory going around in the train or with your car. But it's also a society where it's possible and probably that people meet. I mean, possible and probable, nobody can oblige people to meet. But you can create a condition in which it's more possible that people meet. And this proven that if people have the possibility to intersect, to have some intersection on their own life, it's more possible that they start a conversation and they start also to have some kind of relationship. And if they start a conversation, they can start to decide to do something together. And this is for me what is the beginning of recreating a community. So proximity means the potentiality of more empathy, more sociability, more social integration, and more sense of being close. So it's an antidote to the loneliness that we were saying before, that is such a great issue. But not only this, because there is a more deeper impact on what could be the way to organize the society or a city in the society in a really sustainable way. So before I've been quoted something that I was saying 20 years ago. It was this small, local, open and connected. And many people, including myself, since I don't remember, maybe now 30 years, said we don't know how a society, sustainable society should be, but we know some elements. And some element is that the vertical system are fragile, so we should have horizontal one, that the vertical system cannot use at best diffuse the resources, so it has to be horizontal, and so on and so forth, and many other motivations. And this was how to say what we know about the future, what should be a possible sustainable future should be based on systems that have to be distributed. And to be distributed means mainly local, but being connected and small, but at the same time linked to the long network. And now talking about proximity, it's a little bit, I hope at least, more easy to capture what is the meaning, because small, locally connected could be very clear for who understands it, but could also be very abstract. And now when we talk about a city or a society organized in this way, it is possible, and there are people that are working on it, on seeing this reorganization of the society as the possibility to create a micro-environment in which you try to have the more that is possible of self-sufficiency, but being connected with the others. So it's not a self-sufficiency as all separated by the other ones, but creating this distributed system-based thing. And so proximity has a prerequisite to create a resilient network and local ecosystem. So you cannot have a local ecosystem if you don't have the proximity in between the actors. So there is these three levels. One is how you distribute the services, so to bring the services, to spread the services around, the relationship with your attitude, and being open toward the others, so to create something more social. And finally, the precondition to generate some system that could, if it's done, be organized as a resilient, sustainable society. So, if you put them together, this is written what I already said, this gives the idea of a scenario. But a scenario is a scenario and not only an image when you can say, in principle, it can be viable. So I think this, for us, designers, is very important. One thing is to imagine something that maybe it's an imagination. If you are a writer, you can write a beautiful poem, or you write a book about what you imagine of the future without saying how it could be real. If you are a designer, you have to produce a scenario. For me, a scenario is an image plus some idea of the strategy that permit to get it. And where are the power on which you can leverage to get in that direction. So my here arriving more near to what we do is the core of the story. It's not only to say, oh my God, it would be beautiful to have this system in which we have this new kind of proximity, full stop. But say, is this possible? In which way? On what we can bet to have the possibility to move in this direction. And I have three main leverage. to talk about the social innovation that, as you will see, in some way goes, luckily, in this direction. To talk about some public policies, that now there are some public policies that goes in this direction, and afterward, what we can do in more precise way as design expert. So I don't know, who knows what is social innovation? Everybody? Nobody?
Everybody in a different way.
But in any case, social innovation, now I'm not going to go too much deep in this discussion, but some few words maybe are enough to explain. So we talk about social innovation when people start to live or to think to themselves in a way that was not the normal standard way in the mainstream. So it's always a change in the system. And all innovation are changing the system. The social innovation as opposed to the technical innovation is when the change is not mainly driven by some new technology and therefore start from some place where somebody developed scientifically and technologically some new possibility, but start from people that using the technology that are normal as technology have the idea to reorganize things in a different way. We have not talked, we mean everybody, not talking about social innovation till the beginning of this century, even though social innovation always existed. But for some reason, we were some way looking to the technical innovation so much that we lose the capability to see also the social innovation. At the beginning of this century, something happened, because also the social innovation, as all the innovation goes by waves, is not continuous. So there are some moments in which it happens. And at the beginning of this century, in a lot of different places, something started to happen that can be named as cases of social innovation in this new wave of social innovation that are being characterized for what was the specificity of societies and technologies at the beginning of the century, that started to discuss how people can live. And so we have all the story about co-housing, community living, discuss the welfare, that is not only to receive some service, but also to organize some community. And we started to talk about community-based welfare. And the idea that food was not given that we have to move toward the most industrialized food, but we can have food that comes from the local and the seasonal and the organic. And this was at the beginning small groups, and afterward become markets and become something that you can find also in the supermarket. And afterward, the idea that was not say that the only technological development of the production has to be the very big manufacturing places, but you can have also what was the maker movement, the Fab Lab, that was very limited, but they tell the story that it was possible also to go in another direction, that there was something that could be very near, very look to the future, but at a smaller scale. And this has also helped to rediscuss also the craftsman and to see the craftsman as a new possibility and not only as an old one. And people that was not knowing each other in the 5 minutes to 40 minutes or 5 minutes to 30 minutes?
5 minutes to 30.
No,
it's almost 30 minutes.
Okay. So people that try to organize themselves to revitalize the neighborhoods in which they are living, or generate new cultural activities, or so the dynamization of the... So people that, in a moment in which there was a mainstream, they say the place do not exist because people live only in the flow of information, all those people was trying to re-root themselves in some place. So all this, and I could continue being, we can find in Europe, but we can find practically everywhere in the world, also with some differences, has been called the social innovation. More precisely, it's a bottom-up, transformative social innovation for sustainability, because in reality there are also other kinds of social innovation that I'm not considering now. they are very diverse. What they have in common? They have in common something. The first is that they are people that, as opposed to the main description of people in this modernity, they are considered as more and more individual and in competition one with the other one. Those people choose to do something together. So it's not the community of the past in which people was born in the community, so it was not a choice. In this case, they choose to do something together, and they choose to collaborate. But for the sake of what I want to say today, they are also rooted in a place. So all of them, especially now, use also some digital platform, use some digital device, but they use it to bring back people together and to bring back them in the place where they are. So they are communities of place. That means communities that are interested in different topics, but all of them have a reference in the physical place where they live. And develop new ideas locally. They increase the diversity and the richness of the ecosystem. So they bring in the ecosystem that could be, in some example, desertified, so you could not find anything around. You can find, again, a market, you can find a kindergarten, you can find the people that create a new cultural center. So they bring in the locality a richness and a diversity of activity that was in some way disappearing. And for this reason, for me, if we can talk about the real possibility of implementing the scenario of proximity, is because we have 20 years of experience of all these different activities together that generate, I call here, the building blocks. So if we want to imagine the scenario of proximity, we have not now to draw some images that Manzini or whoever designed, but we can take together so many experience and say, look, if we put together these things, this activity, we start to see something that could be near to this scenario, this sustainability through proximity. What's important that can be said more today, not today, but in the last few years, and was not visible in the beginning. So when this kind of process started, we saw only some people that was starting from the bottom to do a constellation of new activities. But luckily, at that moment, those group, we call the social heroes, so they was capable to do something against, in some way, the opinion, the main opinion against the institutions. Now several institutions started to understand that what they are doing could be interesting, and therefore we start to have some policy done by some institutions that try to, in some way, integrate the good ideas that emerged by this bottom-up social innovation in some more institutionalized framework. I could talk, for instance, about care and the discussion about the community-based welfare that became a terminology that is being assumed also by the European community that talk about community-based welfare. And the community-based welfare is based on the experience done with the circle of care and with the many activities around the world in which you had people that was trying to help each other. But I wish to use another case in which is very evident. That is the one of the policy for the city. And I will use the example of Paris. And just to give you the idea that there is many limits. So if somebody knows, it's a very well-known example, but can be discussed by many points of view. But at the same time, it's quite interesting that a big city as Paris has taken policy in this direction as something that could be very important for them. And has been so important that the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has been elected 3 years ago, now 2 years and a half ago, with a program that was called the 50-minute city, La Ville de Quart d'Heure. And she, let's say, I want to repeat, it's not all gold, what I'm saying. Whatever I will say is true, exists. Afterward, there could be many other things that should happen, but it has never been before that the mayor took all this idea, put them together, give a name and say, this is my idea of the city. So in my view, it's very meaningful that it happened with all the limit. I want also to say I will use Paris because it's a very well-known example, but I could also use Milano, that is my city, or I can use Barcelona, where I have worked for 3 years. So there are several cities that have programs like this, but I want to use Paris. Here you have a kind of picture, what is a vision. You have a picture in which many different things happen. And the thing that happened in the case of Paris starts from the very basic. So the organization of the local scale of what is related to safety. So the police, for instance, that has to be organized locally in the way that people know who is responsible, but also the sanification of the city, that you know that there is a responsible for the local quality of the place. I don't know, maybe in Switzerland it's already like this, but in Italy and in France it was not like this. If you had to say something that is not working, you should go in some office at the level of the city. Now they have somebody that is locally responsible for the quality of the physical environment at the local level. And also they gave a kind of application to the citizens that could take some picture and send the picture to this guy. This application is not new. I remember it's one of the applications that we discovered maybe more than 10 years ago. But it's different if you take the picture and afterward you have to send the picture of something that does not work to an office that you don't know where it is, lost in the big city. Or if you know that there is locally an office with a person inside, and if you take the picture of something that does not work and say, hey, do something, it arrives in a very precise place on which you can have a direct interaction. Afterwards, they say we need a very symbolic place to give visibility. And here it's not only a functional issue, it's also an issue to give a visibility. They say the capital of the neighborhoods is the school. And given that the school is occupied only a certain number of hours a day, they say, and the school have a courtyard, we can use the courtyard and upgrade the courtyard and open the courtyard to everybody. And therefore they started the process of opening the courtyard of the school to everybody, to have in every, it's not yet like this, it's only maybe 6 or 7 schools that are already doing that, but the idea is that it would be possible to do it in every possible school. Or they say, okay, in Paris we have a very strong centralized cultural center, museum, the Centre Pompidou, etc. We can have also some platforms that are local and spread in the city that can link the culture at the level, of the global level, with the culture that is produced and distributed locally. And so they decide to have this, no, sorry, this is another thing. This is, I make a mistake. This is this multi-purpose citizen kiosk. This is a kind of bar and office open to have the possibility to interact with people so you can find some information, a kind of concierge for the information of the local scale, at the same time a decentralized office of the city, and with an environment that is like this. So it do not look as an office, it looks like something in between, a bar, a cultural center, etc. And afterward there is this tragedy, I don't know here, of the shops of the neighborhoods. The shops of the neighborhoods are fundamental to maintain a certain life in the neighborhood, but they are closing because they have been for 2 decades or 3 decades in competition with a big commercial center, and at the same time now even more with all the delivery at home. And therefore, they started a very strong policy to try to find a way to regenerate the economy of the proximity, because nothing that I'm telling about can work if economically nothing can happen anymore. So there are programs to support the local economy and in particular the shops. And there is the platform of the culture that I already said, that are normally using some existing library or other center that have been improved, upgraded to become this cultural platform. And afterward, the sport place that are transformed and proposed at the clubs. And so to give you the idea is you are not only the place where you can have some sport, but if you are a mother or a father, you can bring also your kids. And therefore somebody take care of your kids while you are making your sport. Or it's a place where the kids can have sport, but also make some homework. So to imagine that the place where the sport can attract the people not only because there is to make some physical exercise, but because it could be interesting to do it. And okay, this is quite obvious, the new bicycle lines, and to have green streets and that become public space. And this is a very interesting notion because the idea in France, but this is more visible, for instance, in Barcelona, is not that you reduce or eliminate the car to give the street to pedestrian. That could be okay. The street is a place to move, and you have to shift from car toward bicycle or pedestrian, but it is, the street has to be from a monological space only for movement toward a multiple logical space in which is this kind of platform where many different things can happen, as it should be in a public space. So in the case of Paris, so each, I will not do it, but each city has a different strategy. The Paris one has the characteristic of having a very strong will from the center, but what is good is there is a strong vision. They have implemented different projects, but the different projects are several localized projects and very flexible. So it's not a kind of machine that say, okay, we want to do like this, and from tomorrow everybody has to do it. So there is an idea, a vision, some money, some norms that try to gently push to move in this direction. And this to enrich the proximity system. And what is very crucial, and we will arrive to the last point, is sometimes you need to have this centralized will of doing something. But if you remember, 10 minutes ago, I was talking about the social innovation. I was talking about the energy and the capability and the will that you can find in the city. So you have to be very attentive that what is centralized do not kill that other energies. So the quality and in some way the art of the governance is how you can leave space, how what you do as a centralized government can create opportunity for who is willing to do something, to do it and to work and to organize something. And therefore, this kind of interplay between what is happening from the bottom, usually at the molecular scale, and what you can do as a frame that try to give to this molecular activity some support, some direction, and some help. This is related to, at the end, the quality of the relationships. So it will work or not, this very delicate interaction in between what is decided by the same people and what is being proposed by the center. There is no one rule. If I had the time, if the lecture would be comparison in between the different cities, for instance, I could talk about how different it is. But here, for the sake of this lecture, it's important to say, for me at least, the bottom-up energy in the city is the main issue. So if you don't have that the people in some way participate, you cannot go in the direction of what I'm talking about. At the same time, it's very important that somebody give some direction, help, put some money, and give some norms. And therefore, there is the interplay in between who gives this vision and this very general direction and what is happening from the bottom. It happens or not depending on the quality of relationships. And so what we do for proximity is to promote what we said before, but in particular to keep in account what is the quality of the relationships. And I like this image because this is one of the many things that can happen in a city of proximity. And is it possible or not to design this situation? And the answer is not, but yes. Because the relationship per se, at least for me, luckily cannot be designed. So what those people are telling while they are dancing cannot be designed. It's totally free and up to them. Nevertheless, if we have a case like this, if they have the possibility to exchange and maybe to start a conversation and maybe to fall in love or maybe to do something together, is because you have a space that is favorable. So in this case, somebody has opened the street and created the street become a place for dancing. If people say, no, it's impossible, you cannot do it. So they cannot have this opportunity. Of course, you need the music. And the music means the trigger. So the people is there, but to dance, you need to be in some way triggered in doing something, starting the conversation. You can start the conversation because you start to dance with the music. And after, and this is maybe the one that you normally see, also, at least for me, it was the last one that I really focused, is that even though those two people did not know each other before starting to dance, but they knew how to dance. So you need to have something in common. So you cannot have a situation like this if nobody is capable to dance, this kind of dance. And therefore, the combination of these three, to have a space, favorable physical spaces, and to have something that is capable to trigger, and to help in generating this common basic knowledge, is what we can call the enabling artifact. So altogether is the enabling system. So here you have enabling artifact. Here you have the strategy for the community building. And here you have the policy to spread some knowledge. And as designer, we can work on each one of these three levels. And I want to finish it now in 1 minute. But I think that the story is sufficiently clear. So the enabling artifact, if we take the example of Paris, all the examples that you see had product, infrastructure, places. So there is something that has to be designed, included economic model, digital platform, included, this is very important. If we have to go in depth, that normally, if you want to have proximity, you have to move not in monofunctional places, but multifunctional places. And all these are the enabling artifacts. And afterwards, you have the community making. This is what is normally more normal for when people talk about design for social innovation. So what we can do. And we can do something. So we can do always in creating opportunities. So to create opportunities and probability that people met and do something together. And I could show some example now, but I want to finish. And third is what we can do as designer to spread the knowledge that permit to people to be active, also in a designerly way. And my example came from Milano, but maybe there is also in other places, where in Milano we have something they call La Scuola di Quartiere, the school of the neighborhoods, that is something in between incubator and the school. And the call is whoever has some ideas for how to improve the neighborhood, you can come here and we will help you in, not for sure in doing it, because it's not sure that it could be really realized, but at least to create a more solid idea. And it works very well. And in my view, this is a kind of emblematic strategy to try to improve. Because if it is true, as I wrote in my first book, that has been in Design When Everybody Designs, that everybody has some design capability, potentially, but afterwards we develop this possibility if we have the opportunity to. And therefore, this, as the Scuola di Quartiere, the School of the Neighborhoods in our case, it's a way to help people to reinforce their capability to design something that they would like to see in their own neighborhoods. And yes, this was the old story. I hope that move from the very general motivation toward also saying, okay, but what we, designer, can do beyond considering that all the story could eventually be interesting. And thank you. I hope that you are still alive. And I am still alive, so this is already a good thing. We are all alive at the moment. And we can have some discussion.
So you mentioned how, thanks. You mentioned kind of the antigens, the things that poison proximity. One of them is being delivery services, right? Because then people don't walk, and they don't buy locally. But I'm just wondering if you also feel like private space or private clubs, or like to what extent does Zoom or the metaverse or like other things take away from the potential of the 15-minute city that I think we all want to live in?
But I suppose that you already have the answer.
I don't.
Because if we talk about scenarios, now we have several scenarios in competition. There is the traditional scenario of distances of the city of zoning that has been updated with some idea of the smart city, and says, okay, everything is as it was. You can do the same kind of activities that you did before, and we, with our technology, will fix all the problems. So this is one possibility. Another possibility is on the opposite, that is a dystopian scenario that is much more disruptive. That is the one that I call everything at home and from home. So you stay at home. The world is awful, but we give you the opportunity to migrate in a multiverso, and or something similar. So from your desktop or your front door, you can have whatever you want without moving from home. And this is clearly something that is the opposite of any idea of a social life, of any idea of social city. And this is very dangerous. It's super dangerous. And we all know that with the COVID and with the lockdown, everybody have learned how simple it is to have some slaves that brings you the pizza or whatever of the books at home. And so this is really a very dangerous perspective. And the idea of proximity, with the word that I'm using, or maybe you can find some other words, is saying it's good to do something nearby, but this do not mean everything at home. It means everything, potentially everything nearby. And we can see also how you can use the new digital possibility. For instance, in Milano, no, everywhere, but I can tell for Milano because I know better, there is a program of the Comune di Milano that is called near work as opposed to homework. So the idea is it could be very good not to have move for kilometers to go to your work, but there are many reasons not to stay at home. And therefore, there has been the transformation of the co-working space, that at least in Milano, the co-working space, when they started, each one of them was at the city level. So there was nothing related to proximity. And now we are observing that there are a change in the co-working space that tend to be more related to the locality. So you get up every day, you get out from your home, and you go in the office with the difference. The office and your colleagues in the office are the ones that share with you the space, but maybe not the kind of work that you are doing. And in the same way that this could be said, and in some way, unfortunately, I don't know if it is a majority, but it's happening, is you can do it for many other things. And so how you can use some possibility of the technologies, but in a way that is not bringing everybody at home. And in my view, just to finish this idea of the metaverse, I was discussing with her this afternoon. It's something that makes me sick because it's so terrible. I don't know here in Switzerland, but in Italy, now not because there is the war, so everybody is talking about the war, but before the war, every day there was at least 2 articles that say, oh, in the metaverse, now you have the fashion in the metaverse, oh, now in the metaverse you have the art gallery in the... So they were pushing. But what does it mean? It means, look, the physical world in which you are is such a disaster that you can move in another one that is hyper simplified, is simple, you do not have any risk, and so offering to people something that is very near to a drug at the end of the day. And the fact that everybody is pushing in that direction is really very dangerous. So the fact that I present positive things do not mean that this will be what will happen. We have to know that there is a kind of conflict. And also, if you, I don't know, if you are participating to some European call or European research, when Europe now talk about the future, the New Deal, it's not one idea. So maybe our role is also to clarify that there are, maybe in the same call, you can have something that goes in different directions. So my modest attempt is to make clear that what can happen are different possibilities, and it's not written which one will win, but it's up to our sensitivity and in some way our ethical choice to say in which direction I would like to help the system to move. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. You talked about Paris. Participatory budgeting is a big issue in Paris. One of the problems of it is that mostly middle-aged white men or educated people participate in it. Do you have any kind of suggestions? How do we break this bias? How do we engage wider, younger, more diverse populations in participatory budgeting?
This is a very important issue. I don't have the clear solution, but let me explain to the one that maybe do not know well the story. So I couldn't say everything in one lecture, so I selected what to say. But for sure, if you remember the images that I say what is social innovation, you see mainly middle-class white people. And we discussed a little bit also with some students this morning. And so the criticism could be, all this story requires for people with some space in mind, and I will not say more intelligent, but with the time to dedicate, energy to dedicate. And therefore, if you are a very poor people, very often you are so pushed by the day-by-day activity that you don't have time. And therefore, some criticism is done saying, oh, but all this story is a story for white middle-class people. They could be in Europe, could be in America, could be in China. In China, maybe they are not white, but there is a certain layer of people that can do this kind of activities. And this is the problem. But once that we know that is a problem, we can try to do something against this. Oh, this is me. Somebody. So in some way, to generate the change, you cannot start where the problems are bigger. You start where there are problems, and there are somebody that is willing to do something. And therefore, very often you do not start from some places that are in a very bad condition. And this is, whatever I said today, if we look historically, the beginning is done by a group of people that are very energetic, but they have to have the time and also a certain preparation to do it. But when the ideas start to consolidate, well, at that point, one of the roles of the institution is in some way to make possible that a good idea could be generalized. And I give you one example that comes from my personal or my group experience. From the beginning, one of the lines in which we worked was on the, maybe we know each other from Italy, no? So probably you know what I'm saying. We work on co-housing. Co-housing means a group of people that decided to live together, not together, to live, each one is one flat, but sharing some services, some spaces, etc. Co-housing. The co-houser were people that had sufficient imagination to imagine that this could be done. So the result was there was a very precise group of people in general that was generating this co-housing, with also some limits and some risk to transform the co-housing in gated village. So we are all white and rich, and we want to go together, share something, and protect ourselves from the bloody people that is outside. So immediately we recognized that it was good to imagine that somebody proposed some way of living that is not everybody closed in their own small box, but having the advantage of having your privacy, but also enjoying a space for the kids, a space for parties, a space for guests that we can manage together. But it was risky to create closed groups. What happened is that co-housing is also going on for the good and for the bad, but at least in Italy, in other places maybe the story has been diverse, the idea has been taken by what is in Italy the Social Housing Foundation. That is an institution that takes care of the social housing. So in the moment in which it switched from who are the voluntary with all the energy and the difficulty to do it, toward, it was one of the examples was on this, an institution that can decide and say, okay, in this building we want to have some elderly people, some young people, some a little bit more rich, some a little bit more poor, and maybe also to leave some space for migrants or leave some space for very particular case. This choice to create this mixité, this mix, can be done. So the institution has the power to generate what is impossible otherwise. Or to give another example, going to the city, it's proven that every time somebody that do it because they like it to do it, start to improve the quality of the city, you, willing or not, normally not willing it, generate what is called the gentrification. So given that if you make in a place that was really very bad and you start to have a community garden and afterward you have a food co-op and afterward you have a place for the kids, etc., this place that was so bad start to be better. And we say, well, good, we wanted to have it better. Unfortunately, in the moment that this can become better, somebody from outside starts to see that it's better, and it's also very cheap. And so somebody wants to go to live there, and afterward, you know, this is a gentrification, that progressively you have the change from the original people to a new people. To contrast this risk or better, you can say, somebody says, given that the risk is gentrification, don't do anything. But in my view, given that people live in such a worse way, you have to leave them to live in a worse way because otherwise you have the gentrification. No, you have to try to improve the quality of life and to have the tools to reduce the risk of gentrification. So how you can reduce the risk of gentrification? There are policy, again, the role of the institutions, because are the institutions that can do it. And what they can do, for instance, they can, it could be different place by place, but in any case, to maintain some social or popular housing there. So to guarantee that in any case there are some places where the cost of flats is not moving on, and this is sort of working on those places that have been. But the second one that probably strategically is most important is say, okay, there is a place, for instance, in Milano, the Nolo district that is in this condition, or in Barcelona, the neighborhoods where they develop this project is called the Superillas, the super blocks, that are becoming a place for gentrification. So it's so beautiful to live in Sant'Antonio, that is one of these super blocks already done, that there are a lot of people coming there. So what you can do is that I have to finish?
No, you have questions in the chat. People are writing to you.
So what you can do is to spread the same quality to all the city. So in the moment in which you are not concentrating on those neighborhoods that for some reason had more active people, etc. So why it's like this? Because in Nolo in Milano or in Sant'Antonio, the neighborhood in Sant'Antonio in Barcelona, there was the possibility to do it immediately. But once that you do it and you prove that it could be improved, the institution should transform. You remember they say the right of the city. So something that is proven that can happen should become a right for everybody. So if you do the same improvement in many places, you reduce the gap in between one neighborhood and the other one, and reducing the gap, you reduce the motivation for people to move from one to the other ones. I understand this is very complicated, but this is, again, the interplay in between the fact that people can do something, and this is important, because if we don't have something that concretely happens, there is something very abstract that is said. But at the same time, the role of the institution is to try to generalize it.
When you say we, you, and people, who do you mean? We, you, people?
Well, I mean...
in Paris, there is this wonderful mayor.
Yeah.
And Paris operates on a very centralized level. Who do you work with when you...
You are right. When I say we, it was a generic we that include the many different stakeholders that have a different place.
Sounds complicated.
So, in the case of Paris, if they did what they did, and they did with some limit, as I said, it's not all gold, but they did in any case, very interesting policy, is because there have been many other people doing something before. So there has been a we that are who represent the civil society that had some activity, and the we in the case of Paris that is the mayor. In the case of Paris there is also somebody that is the one that in some way introduced the notion of the 50-minute city, that is Carlos Moreno, but the origin is Spanish, but is a professor in
Harvard.
In Paris, that has been a kind of consultant of the mayor, and in some way give a kind of frame. And so it's the interplay of many different people. So the we, in my case, when I use it, is looking in general what has to happen, and case by case, you have to see where you have to work. For instance, in the case of Paris, for me, this very generic we should now work mainly on the bottom-up things, because in Paris, for several reasons, there is an history that is very top-down, very Cartesian and top-down. So the risk is that these initiatives are not perceived as something that is part of what the society wants. So let's take the example that I said, to open the court of the schools. The idea is to have something similar to a community garden. The community garden were totally autonomous, but they happen where they can happen. When you say, but the school, you have a school in every neighborhood, more than one. And so it's possible to say, okay, the new community garden happens inside the school that are open, the court, to everybody. Fantastic. But when you make this move, what can happen? It can happen that you have somebody that is paid to open and to say people that they can enter, to take care of it, or you can have the local society through some organization enter in the story and take care and become actors of the story. So it will happen or not. This is the challenge that has to be seen case by case. So in the case of Paris, given that they have had this very strong central will of doing things, in my view, now the main issue is to guarantee that there is maintained what I call the local energy to express themselves and to feel that what the mayor is doing is really their own part of their own story. Because when I say it's not all gold, that making my small inquirer, somebody say the city of 50 minutes, but this is a story about the mayor. So they do not feel as to be part. I suppose in the case of Milano, that in my view is a super interesting case, even though it's less difficult to see, because it's a case in which there are really a quantity of activity that happens from the bottom, and the city, with the two last mayors, had been capable to have what we call a collaborative governance, so to help each other without being so visible, but creating conditions to make easier for them to exist, to go on, and to maintain their activity in time. But at the same time, this is very good, because in this case, nothing is said this is from the mayor. This is, if you see some literature talking about the Milano case, it's many different examples, a list of different examples, and the city is a little bit behind the scene. That by a certain point of view is good, because everybody that is involved feel that what happened is their own activity, but at the same time it looks like that there is no one strong vision, and therefore it's very difficult to talk about it. And also many people in Milano do not know that this is in some way one vision. It's many different small things that are happening.
And
so
now to the questions in the chat.
Yeah.
And now to the question. So it might be an unjustified fear, but what if proximity makes communities become egotistical and not able to see the needs of other communities? Mm-hmm. Thinking of what happened in the US, where Democrats and Republicans moved into red-blue neighborhoods and closed up to other perspectives. The same person adds, another question, should this start from bigger cities to become doable, thinkable in smaller ones, following up?
Okay, let's just say for the first one.
Go for it.
So again, this is a very subtle issue, but very important. I used the term community, and everybody uses the term community. And we need to use the term community, because otherwise how you call people that have interaction one with the other one and with the place in which they live. At the same time, the community that I'm talking about, me and many people as me, are very diverse from the traditional communities. And therefore, until at the beginning of the story, it was relatively simple, because there was the mainstream, super individualistic vision of the society. For the elder people here, the Lady Thatcher very famous quote, there is no society but only individuals. And therefore there was a kind of main trend that was melting all the traditional networks and all the traditional communities to create a non-society of individuals. And therefore it appeared that everything you could do to put people together was good, because it was opposite to that kind of trend. But it appeared clearer and clearer, and this is what also your colleague was saying in his question, that first of all, there are some old communities that still exist, and what we want to do with that. But the risk is that given the limit of this hyper-individualistic society, the people is in some way pushed to search for some communities. And the simplest way to create a community is to create a community about an identity. And therefore you create a community that are new communities, so people choose to enter in a community that is linked by the fact that we are in some way equal. We are white, or we are Catholic, or we are whatever, and we create a kind of group of people that establish borders. So we are the ones that are on this side of the border. And this is very dangerous, super dangerous. And this is what was saying. So you have an egoistic community that are always looking inside. The one, not that I am saying, but what appear from the social innovation that I was dealing with, I call them project-based communities. That means people are together, not because they recognize themselves as being equal or following the same ideology, but because they wanted to do something together. And therefore, this community is not defined by the border, it's defined about what is at the center, so what we want to do together. I give you an example. In the case of Milano that I was mentioning, that is the one that I know better, there were several existing community, ethnic community, because it's one of the neighborhoods that is more mixed in terms of different ethnic groups. And those groups are very closed. There are good reasons why they are like this, but this is not good, because sometimes they also clash one with the other one, so it's not one part of a dynamic society. They are island or group of people that do not interact with the others. The new story about these neighborhoods has been much more a project-based community, and I give you one example. The first project that they did, afterward they did so many, now there are hundreds of different projects, but the first one was mainly done by the parents of the kids in a school that had a square in front of the school that was full of traffic, and they wanted to, in some way, free this square from the traffic in the way that the kids, when they get out from the school, have a space in which they can stay, chat, and play without risk to be taken by a car. When you propose this proposition, it's not something that is related to who you are of the different ethnic communities, but simply on the fact, is your kid going to this school? You like the idea that we create a space safer for the kids when they get out from the school. So this is not something that decides who is not part of this group. This group could include everybody, recognize that it could be interesting to have a safe space in front of the school. So this is the example of what I mean for project-based community. So, and afterward, but this is a little bit complicated, the overall local community of these neighborhoods is the intersection of many different projects. So you have a group of people that are the one, for instance, working for the kids in the school, and you are the one that are working to create some cultural activity, you are the one that are regenerating but they are all living in the same place. So in some way the mesh of these different groups create, seen from distance, this is a new community that is a mixture of different projects.
We need to. You can keep on talking with Ezio in the apero, but I am afraid that some of you will start leaving and there will be no apero.
Okay.
foi muito bom, foi muito bom, gente.